6 weeks after their tearful goodbye, Catherine stood at the same window where she had watched William's departure, but this time she was scanning the sky for the aircraft that would bring him home. The children pressed against the glass beside her, their excitement barely contained as they waited for their father's return. The relief mission had ended successfully, and today they would finally be reunited as a complete family. The house buzzed with preparation for William's homecoming. Staff had prepared his favorite meal, fresh flowers filled every room, and the children had created elaborate welcome home signs that decorated the front hall. Charlotte had finished a new collection of drawings documenting everything William had missed during his absence, while George had practiced a speech welcoming him back. Louis had barely slept the night before, too excited about Daddy coming home day to rest. Catherine herself had spent extra time preparing for this reunion, choosing clothes carefully and ensuring she looked her best for the cameras that would inevitably capture their public reunion. But more importantly, she wanted to look beautiful for William after their long separation, to show him that she had remained strong and vibrant during his absence. The media presence at William's return was even larger than at his departure, with international news crews joining British correspondents to cover the end of what had become a globally followed humanitarian mission. His work in Africa had received extensive coverage, with images of him working alongside aid workers becoming symbols of modern royal engagement with global crises. Catherine had followed every news report obsessively, proud of the difference William had made, but also increasingly aware of how the experience had changed him. His brief phone calls had revealed someone deeply affected by the suffering he had witnessed, humbled by the resilience of the communities he had served, and more committed than ever to using his position for meaningful humanitarian work. The approaching aircraft finally appeared as a small dot on the horizon, growing larger as it descended toward the private airfield. Catherine's heart began beating faster, 6 weeks of longing and worry culminating in this moment of anticipated reunion. She gripped the children's hands, sharing their excitement while trying to maintain the composure expected of her public role. Security personnel moved into position as the aircraft touched down and taxied toward the terminal building. Palace officials made final preparations for the official welcome, mindful of protocol, while also respecting the family's need for an emotional reunion. The balance between public duty and private feeling had to be maintained even in this intensely personal moment. As the aircraft door opened and William appeared at the top of the stairs, Catherine felt overwhelmed by love and relief. He looked thinner than when he had left, his face bearing the marks of exhaustion and emotional strain, but he was whole and safe, and finally home. The children broke free from her grasp and ran toward him the moment protocol allowed, their joyful shouts filling the air. William knelt down to embrace all three children at once, his own composure finally breaking as he held them close. 6 weeks of missing bedtime stories, school events, and daily hugs poured out in this reunion, father and children clinging to each other as if to make up for all the lost time in a single moment. Catherine approached more slowly, aware of the cameras but focused entirely on the man she had missed every single day of his absence. When William looked up from the children and their eyes met, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. Despite all the watching crowds, all the official protocols, all the public nature of this moment, they existed only for each other. Their embrace was everything Catherine had dreamed of during the long weeks apart, strong arms around her, familiar scent, solid presence that made her feel complete again. William whispered apologies for worrying her, expressions of love, promises that he had thought of her every day. She responded with her own whispered words of welcome, relief, and enduring love. The formal welcome ceremony proceeded around them, but Catherine barely noticed the speeches, presentations, or official acknowledgments of William's humanitarian work. She was focused entirely on studying his face, relearning the details she had tried so hard to keep clear in her memory, confirming that he was really present and safe. During the drive home, William regaled the children with stories from his mission, carefully chosen tales that emphasized the positive aspects of his experience, while avoiding the more frightening or heartbreaking elements. He described children who had shared their toys with him, families who had invited him to share meals, communities that had worked together to rebuild after the floods. But Catherine could see the deeper impact of his experience in his eyes, in the way he held the children a little tighter, in his obvious gratitude for the comfortable safety of their family life. The mission had changed him, giving him new perspective on their privileged existence and renewed commitment to using that privilege responsibly. That evening, after the children were finally asleep following an extended bedtime routine with their returned father, Catherine and William had their first private conversation in 6 weeks. They sat in their bedroom simply holding each other, both overwhelmed by the reality of being together again. William told her about the moments when he had questioned his decision to go, particularly after the convoy incident when he realized how much his safety meant not just to him, but to his family. He described nights when he had lain awake thinking about her managing everything alone, worried that he had been selfish in pursuing the mission despite the cost to those he loved most. Catherine shared her own struggles with his absence, her growth in confidence and independence, and her new understanding of the sacrifices required by royal service. She told him about the strength she had discovered within herself, but also about the loneliness that had made every day feel incomplete without him. They talked about the future, about finding better balance between public duty and family needs, about preparing the children for a life where service to others might sometimes require personal sacrifice. They discussed the lessons learned from this separation and how those lessons might guide their decisions going forward. As they finally settled into sleep together, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude not just for William's safe return, but for the strength their relationship had shown during this test. They had loved each other across distance, supported each other through fear and uncertainty, and emerged with an even deeper appreciation for their partnership. The goodbye that had seemed so devastating 6 weeks earlier had ultimately strengthened their bond, teaching them both that their love could survive separation, that their family could endure challenges, and that their commitment to each other was strong enough to support whatever demands their royal future might bring. Outside their bedroom window, the same grounds where she had watched him leave now witnessed his return, completing a circle of farewell and reunion that had tested their love and proven its endurance. The nation had witnessed their goodbye and welcomed his return, but the real story was the private journey of a family, learning to love across distance and reuniting with deeper appreciation for their precious time together. 2 weeks into William's mission, Catherine received the call she had been dreading. It came at 3 a.m. London time, jolting her from the light sleep that had become her norm since his departure. Her private secretary's voice was carefully controlled as she explained that William's convoy had encountered severe flooding while attempting to reach a remote village, and communication had been lost for several hours. Catherine's hands shook as she gripped the phone, demanding more details while her mind raced through terrible possibilities. The official reports were frustratingly vague. Bad weather, impassable roads, communication equipment damaged by water. William's security team was following established protocols, but his exact location and condition remained unknown. The palace immediately activated crisis management procedures, coordinating with embassy staff, aid organizations, and local authorities to locate the missing convoy. But for Catherine, these official responses felt inadequate against the magnitude of her fear. Somewhere in a flooded African wilderness, the man she loved was potentially injured, trapped, or worse, and she was powerless to help him. She paced their bedroom in the pre-dawn darkness, still wearing the pajamas she had fallen asleep in, while waiting for his usual evening call that never came. The house felt enormous and empty around her, every shadow seeming to hide additional fears about what might have happened to William. Palace staff arrived within hours to provide support and regular updates, but their carefully professional manner only increased Catherine's anxiety. She could see her own worry reflected in their faces despite their training in maintaining composure during crises. If these experienced royal staff members were concerned, the situation must be serious indeed. The most difficult part was deciding what to tell the children. George, old enough to sense adult tension, asked direct questions about why Mummy seemed scared and why palace officials were visiting so early in the morning. Catherine struggled to provide honest answers without frightening him, explaining that Daddy's phone wasn't working because of bad weather, but that many people were helping to find him. Charlotte seemed to absorb the household's anxiety without understanding its cause, becoming unusually quiet and clinging to Catherine throughout the day. She asked repeatedly if Daddy was coming home soon, as if sensing that something had changed about his planned return. Little Louis continued his normal routine, unaware that anything was wrong, which provided Catherine with brief moments of normalcy amid the crisis. His innocent chatter about everyday concerns reminded her that life continued, even when her personal world felt like it was collapsing. As hours passed without news, Catherine found herself bargaining with God, making impossible promises in exchange for William's safety. She would be a better wife, a more dedicated royal, a stronger mother, anything if he could just come home safely to them. Her faith, usually a source of comfort, now felt like her only lifeline in an ocean of uncertainty. The media had not yet learned about the missing convoy, giving Catherine a brief reprieve from public scrutiny during her private crisis. But she knew that news of William's disappearance would eventually leak, bringing with it intense coverage that would make this already unbearable situation even more difficult to navigate. Her mother arrived within hours of the first call, taking charge of practical matters like meals and childcare, while Catherine maintained her vigil by the phone. Carol's presence provided the kind of unconditional support that royal protocol couldn't offer, allowing Catherine to show her fear and vulnerability without worrying about maintaining appropriate composure. Friends from William's military days contacted the palace offering assistance, sharing stories of his training and competence in difficult situations. Their confidence in his survival skills provided some comfort, but Catherine couldn't shake the knowledge that even the most prepared person could be overwhelmed by natural disasters beyond human control. 18 hours after the first emergency call, Catherine's phone finally rang with news. William's convoy had been found safe but stranded in a village cut off by floodwaters. He was uninjured and had spent the missing hours helping local residents evacuate to higher ground. Communication equipment had been damaged, but temporary repairs allowed him to send a brief message confirming his safety. The relief Catherine felt was so intense it almost knocked her to her knees. All the tension, fear, and desperate worry of the past day collapsed into overwhelming gratitude that he was alive and well. But mixed with relief was anger, at the dangerous conditions he was working in, at the risks he was taking, at her own helplessness in protecting the person she loved most. When she finally heard William's voice over a crackling satellite connection, Catherine had to fight not to demand that he come home immediately. His first words were apologies for worrying her, explanations of what had happened, assurances that he was following all safety protocols, but she could hear exhaustion in his voice, and something else, a deeper understanding of the dangers he was facing. He described the village where he had been stranded, families who had welcomed him despite their own desperate circumstances, children who had shared their meager food supplies with the unexpected royal visitor. His experience of being dependent on local hospitality, rather than protected by royal security, had given him new insight into the lives of the people he was trying to help. Catherine listened to his stories with mixed emotions, pride in his compassion and dedication, fear about the risks he was taking, and growing understanding of why this mission mattered so much to him. She realized that he wasn't just representing the royal family in Africa. He was discovering something essential about his own purpose and character. Their conversation was cut short by technical difficulties, but not before William made her a promise. He would be more careful about communication schedules, more mindful of the worry his family was experiencing, more aware that his safety mattered not just for his own sake but for theirs. After the call ended, Catherine sat in their bedroom holding his pillow, finally allowing herself to cry with relief rather than fear. The crisis had passed, but it had also revealed the true cost of loving someone whose sense of duty might always place him in harm's way. She began to understand that being married to the future king meant accepting that her personal happiness would sometimes be secondary to his public responsibilities. But she also realized that her love for him included loving his commitment to service. Even when that commitment scared her, the experience had tested her strength and revealed reserves of resilience she didn't know she possessed. She had held their family together during crisis, maintained her own composure under extreme stress, and supported William's mission even when every instinct told her to bring him home. As she prepared for bed that night, Catherine felt different than she had that morning. She was still worried about William's safety, still counting the days until his return, but she was also stronger, more confident in her ability to handle whatever challenges their royal life might bring. 3 days after William's departure, Catherine had fallen into a rhythm of managing life without him, though the adjustment felt unnatural and exhausting. Every morning began with checking her phone for messages from him, despite knowing that communication from the remote African region was sporadic at best. The time difference meant that their brief conversations happened at odd hours, leaving her feeling more disconnected from his daily reality. The children had returned from school that first day, full of questions about when Daddy would call, whether he was safe, and why other children at school kept asking them about the television coverage of his departure. Catherine found herself constantly explaining and reassuring, while privately struggling with her own worries about his welfare. George had taken on additional responsibilities without being asked, helping his younger siblings with homework and bedtime routines in a way that reminded Catherine heartbreakingly of William. The young prince seemed to understand instinctively that his mother needed support, even though she tried to hide her stress from the children. Charlotte had become clingy and emotional, asking repeatedly if Daddy missed them and when he would come home. She carried her favorite stuffed animal everywhere and had begun drawing pictures obsessively, always featuring their family of 5 together, as if her artwork could somehow keep them connected across the distance. Louis, too young to fully understand the situation, simply knew that something important was missing from their daily routine. He looked for his father at breakfast each morning, saved toys and stories to share with him, and asked his mother every night if tomorrow would be the day Daddy came home. Catherine's own royal duties continued without pause, requiring her to attend charitable events, host receptions, and maintain public appearances while privately counting the hours until William's next possible communication. She found herself studying world maps obsessively, trying to understand the geography and challenges of the region where he was working. The media coverage of William's mission provided some information about his activities, but it also increased Catherine's anxiety. News reports described dangerous conditions, infrastructure challenges, and security concerns that made her question whether she should have encouraged him to go. Television footage showed him working alongside aid workers, distributing supplies to desperate families, and visiting makeshift hospitals where injured flood victims received treatment. In one particularly difficult news segment, Catherine watched her husband help evacuate a group of children from a building that was dangerously close to collapse. His compassion and hands-on involvement made her proud, but seeing him in such a precarious situation also terrified her. She realized that his safety depended not just on his security team, but on unpredictable environmental factors beyond anyone's control. Their first successful phone conversation came on day 4, lasting only 12 minutes but providing Catherine with the reassurance she desperately needed. William's voice sounded tired but strong, and he described the overwhelming need he was witnessing alongside the incredible resilience of the affected communities. He talked about families who had lost everything but still welcomed him with gratitude, children who smiled despite their difficult circumstances, and local volunteers who worked tirelessly to help their neighbors. He asked detailed questions about each of the children, wanting to know about their school activities, their moods, their reactions to his absence. Catherine could hear the longing in his voice. When she described Louis's latest attempt to build a tower tall enough to reach Daddy in Africa, or Charlotte's decision to sleep with his pillow every night. When William asked how she was managing, Catherine gave him the strong, positive response she had practiced, emphasizing the children's resilience and her confidence in handling everything alone. She didn't mention her sleepless nights, her constant worry, or the way she sometimes caught herself listening for his key in the door. Her job was to support him in his mission, not add to his burden with her own struggles. After the call ended, Catherine felt simultaneously better and worse. Better because she had heard his voice and confirmed his safety. Worse because the conversation made his absence feel more real and permanent. She realized that brief communications might actually make the separation harder to bear, like reopening a wound just as it began to heal. The palace staff had noticed her distress, though she tried to hide it. Her personal secretary rearranged her schedule to reduce travel and increase time at home with the children. Security personnel reported that she was sleeping poorly and eating less than usual. Even her lady-in-waiting, who had served the royal family for decades, had never seen Catherine struggle so visibly with the demands of royal life. Friends from her pre-royal days reached out with offers of support, but Catherine found it difficult to explain the unique challenges of her situation. How could she describe the strange combination of public scrutiny and private loneliness, the pressure to appear strong while feeling vulnerable, The knowledge that millions of people were watching her cope with this separation. Her mother, Carol Middleton, became a frequent visitor, helping with the children and providing the kind of practical support that palace staff couldn't offer. Carol's presence reminded Catherine of her life before royal duties, when problems could be solved with cups of tea and long conversations rather than protocols and public appearances. During quiet moments after the children were asleep, Catherine found herself writing long letters to William that she would never send. The writing helped her process her emotions and maintain a sense of connection to him, even though she knew he couldn't receive lengthy personal communications while focused on the humanitarian crisis. She wrote about their daily routines, the children's milestones he was missing, her own struggles with single parenting, and her growing understanding of the strength required for royal service. The letters became a form of prayer, a way of sending her love and support across the impossible distance that separated them. As the first week of separation ended, Catherine began to understand that this experience was changing her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was discovering reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, while also recognizing how much her happiness and sense of completeness depended on William's presence in her life. The goodbye that had seemed so final was really just the beginning of a different kind of relationship. Love sustained across distance, partnership maintained through faith rather than daily contact, family connection preserved through hope and determination rather than physical presence. The scene outside Windsor Castle had transformed into a carefully orchestrated media event, yet Catherine felt completely alone, despite being surrounded by dozens of people. Photographers crouched behind barriers, their long lenses focused on every expression, every gesture, every moment of this public goodbye. Television cameras broadcast live to millions of viewers who would witness their farewell from the comfort of their own homes. Safe from the emotional reality Catherine was experiencing, royal protocol officers had briefed them on the appropriate length of the goodbye, the acceptable displays of affection, and the importance of projecting confidence in the mission's success. But no amount of training could prepare Catherine for the actual moment of watching William walk away from her toward an uncertain and potentially dangerous future. The official car waited with its door open, engines running, ready to transport William to the airport where a military aircraft would begin his journey to Africa. Security personnel maintained their professional vigilance, while discreetly allowing the couple some semblance of privacy within the very public setting. Palace staff stood at respectful distances, their faces reflecting the gravity of this departure. William turned to face Catherine one final time before getting into the vehicle. Despite all the cameras, all the watching eyes, all the pressure to maintain royal composure, he cupped her face gently in his hands and looked directly into her eyes. The world around them seemed to fade as they shared this intensely personal moment, communicating everything that couldn't be spoken aloud in such a public forum. Catherine fought back tears, knowing that images of her crying would be analyzed endlessly by media outlets around the world. She had learned over the years to cry later, in private, to save her emotional release for moments when the cameras weren't watching. But the effort of maintaining composure required every ounce of strength she possessed. She whispered words meant only for him, reminders of her love, promises to keep their family strong, requests for him to stay safe and return to them. He responded with his own quiet assurances, voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his eyes. They spoke in the shorthand of a couple who had shared years of love, loss, triumph, and challenge together. The goodbye kiss was brief but profound, appropriate for public viewing yet deeply meaningful to both of them. As their lips touched, Catherine felt as though she was pouring all her love and strength into him, trying to create a shield of protection that would follow him across continents and keep him safe when she couldn't be there to do it herself. William stepped back reluctantly, his hand lingering in hers until the last possible moment. Palace officials discreetly indicated it was time to depart, mindful of flight schedules and the complex logistics of royal travel to a crisis zone. Security personnel moved into position, ready to escort the prince to the airport and eventually to his humanitarian mission. As William approached the car door, he turned back one more time, not to Catherine but toward the house where he knew his children were getting ready for school. Even though they couldn't see him from their bedrooms, he raised his hand in a small wave, a gesture that spoke to his role as a father even in this moment of public duty. Catherine watched him settle into the vehicle, saw him buckle his seatbelt and exchange final words with his security detail. Through the car window their eyes met once more, and she saw him mouth the words "I love you" one final time. She responded silently with the same words, her lips moving without sound, communicating across the glass barrier that now separated them. The car began to move slowly down the driveway, picking up speed as it headed toward the main road. Catherine remained standing exactly where William had left her, watching until the vehicle disappeared completely from view. Even then, she stayed motionless for several long moments, as if moving would somehow make his departure more final, more real. The gathered media captured every second of her solitary figure standing in the morning light, the image that would become iconic of this farewell. Royal correspondents would later describe her dignity and composure, her strength in the face of uncertainty, her embodiment of duty above personal comfort. But Catherine felt none of that strength in the moment. She felt only the hollow ache of missing someone who had just left. Palace staff approached carefully, ready to escort her back inside where she could process this goodbye away from public scrutiny. But Catherine wasn't ready to move yet. She needed a few more moments in the space where William had just been, where she could still almost feel his presence, where the reality of his absence hadn't quite settled in completely. The media began to pack up their equipment, having captured the footage and photographs they needed. Television crews wrapped up their live broadcasts, royal correspondents filed their reports, and photographers sorted through hundreds of images to select the most compelling shots. The public event was concluded, but Catherine's private experience of loss was just beginning. Finally, she allowed herself to be led back inside, past the rooms where William's presence still lingered, his coffee cup on the breakfast table, his pillow still bearing the indent from his head, his reading glasses forgotten on the nightstand. Each reminder of his normal routine made his absence feel more acute, more unnatural. Catherine climbed the stairs to their bedroom and closed the door behind her, finally allowing herself the privacy to cry. The tears came in waves, for the uncertainty ahead, for the children who would miss their father, for the long weeks stretching before them, for the simple loss of her partner's daily presence. She grieved not just for the separation, but for the worry that would now color every day until his return. Outside, the last of the media vehicles pulled away from the castle gates, taking with them the images that would tell the world about this royal goodbye. But inside, Catherine began the much more difficult task of learning to live with his absence, to be strong for their children, and to maintain faith that this farewell was not forever. The house felt different now, quieter and somehow larger, as if William's absence created an actual physical void. Catherine would have to learn to fill that space with hope, with activity, with the demands of single parenting and royal duty. But for now, she simply sat in their bedroom, holding one of his shirts, allowing herself this moment of pure missing him before she had to be strong again. The morning arrived far too quickly, bringing with it a flurry of activity that Catherine wished could be delayed forever. Staff members moved efficiently through the house, completing final preparations for William's departure. Security personnel conducted last-minute briefings, communication specialists tested emergency contact protocols, and palace officials reviewed schedules and contingency plans. Catherine dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that would photograph well, but also provided comfort for the emotional day ahead. She selected a blue dress, William's favorite color on her, and the sapphire earrings he had given her for their anniversary. If the world was going to watch their goodbye, she wanted to look strong and composed, a reflection of the monarchy's stability even in uncertain times. The children woke to find their father already dressed in casual travel clothes rather than his usual suit and tie. The informality somehow made his departure feel more real and immediate. George tried to maintain his grown-up composure but couldn't hide the sadness in his eyes. Charlotte seemed unusually quiet, clutching the final drawing she had completed for him during the night when she couldn't sleep. Breakfast felt surreal. Everyone trying to act normal while knowing nothing about this day was ordinary. William helped Louis with his cereal, just as he did every morning, but his attention seemed divided between family time and the mission ahead. Catherine served his coffee exactly how he liked it, adding an extra spoonful of sugar, because she knew he would need the energy for the long journey ahead. The phone rang constantly with final updates from aid organizations, weather reports from the affected region, and security briefings from embassy staff. Each interruption reminded them that William belonged not just to his family, but to his role as a future king, to causes greater than their personal happiness. Around mid-morning, the children were told it was time to say goodbye before leaving for school. This had been a difficult decision, whether to let them skip classes to see their father off or maintain normalcy by keeping their routines intact. Catherine and William had chosen routine, believing it would be easier for the children to process the goodbye privately before returning to familiar activities with their friends and teachers. George hugged his father tightly, whispering something in his ear that made William smile and nod seriously. Whatever promise or secret they shared, it seemed to give the young prince strength. Charlotte presented her final drawing with great ceremony, explaining each detail and making William promise to look at it whenever he felt lonely. Louis simply wrapped his arms around his father's legs and refused to let go until William knelt down and spoke to him quietly about being brave and taking care of Mummy Catherine. Watch these individual goodbyes with tears threatening to spill over. Seeing William with their children, so gentle and attentive despite his own emotional state, reminded her why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. His natural warmth and genuine care for others, starting with his own family, made him the man she wanted to spend her life with. After the children left for school with their protection officers, an unusual quiet settled over the house. For the first time in days, Catherine and William were truly alone together without schedules or interruptions or the need to stay strong for little eyes watching them. They stood in their living room, surrounded by family photos and children's artwork, suddenly aware that this moment would have to sustain them through weeks of separation. William pulled Catherine close, and she finally allowed herself to cry against his shoulder. All the composure she had maintained for the children's sake dissolved into honest emotion. She told him how frightened she was, not just about his safety, but about managing everything alone. The royal duties, the children's needs, the constant public scrutiny, all of it felt overwhelming without her partner beside her. He held her tightly, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances he wasn't entirely sure he believed himself. He promised to be careful, to follow all safety protocols, to remember that his first duty was to return home to his family. But they both knew that once he was in the field, helping desperate people in crisis, his compassionate nature might lead him to take risks that protocol would discourage. They talked about their shared faith, drawing strength from beliefs that had sustained them through previous challenges. Catherine reminded William of the prayers that would follow him, of the support system waiting for him both in the affected region and back home. She spoke of her confidence in his abilities, his training, his instincts that had always guided him well in difficult situations. As the departure time approached, media vehicles began gathering outside the gates. Photographers positioned themselves for the best angles. Television crews prepared for live broadcasts, and royal correspondents reviewed their notes about the mission's significance. The private family goodbye was about to become a public moment that would be analyzed and discussed around the world. Catherine checked her appearance one final time, ensuring she looked composed and dignified for the cameras. She practiced her smile, the one that would convey appropriate concern without suggesting panic, confidence without appearing callous to the seriousness of the mission. Years of royal training had taught her how to present the right image even when her heart was breaking. William's luggage was loaded into the official vehicle while he completed final security briefings. His protection team reviewed emergency procedures, communication schedules, and contingency plans for various scenarios. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders visibly as he transformed from husband and father into the prince, undertaking a dangerous humanitarian mission. Moment arrived when they could no longer delay. Palace officials discreetly indicated it was time to move to the departure point, where media would capture the farewell. Catherine took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to walk beside her husband toward their public goodbye. As they approached the waiting vehicle, Catherine slipped her hand into William's, feeling his wedding ring against her palm. This simple gesture of connection would have to carry them through the coming weeks of separation. Around them, cameras clicked and television crews broadcast live, but for just a moment they existed only for each other in the space between their private love and public duty. The dinner table at Anmer Hall felt unusually quiet, despite the animated chatter of 3 young voices. Catherine had prepared William's favorite meal, roast chicken with all the traditional sides, the same comfort food they had enjoyed during their early married years when royal duties were less demanding. She watched him carefully as he laughed at Louis's silly jokes and listened intently to Charlotte's detailed explanation of her latest school project. Every gesture, every expression seemed precious now. George sat a little straighter than usual, clearly trying to be mature about his father's upcoming departure. At 12, he understood more about royal duty than his siblings, having already begun his own preparation for future responsibilities. He asked thoughtful questions about the relief mission, wanting to understand why his father felt compelled to go personally when he could have simply sent financial support or issued statements of concern. William explained patiently, using simple terms that all three children could understand. He told them about families who had lost their homes to floods, children who were hungry and scared, and communities that needed hope. He described how sometimes people needed to see that others cared enough to come in person, to share their struggles and work alongside them. His voice carried conviction, but Catherine could hear the slight tremor that betrayed his own anxiety about leaving. After dinner, the family moved to the living room for what had become a cherished tradition, story time by the fireplace. William had been reading the children a chapter each night from an adventure novel about brave explorers, and tonight he would finish the book. As he read, his voice strong and steady, Catherine noticed how intently the children listened, as if trying to memorize the sound of his voice. Charlotte curled up against her mother's side, her small hand playing with Catherine's wedding ring, a nervous habit she had developed whenever she sensed adult worry. Louis climbed onto his father's lap, occasionally interrupting the story to ask if the characters were scared, if they missed their families, if they would come home safely. Each innocent question felt like an arrow to Catherine's heart. When the story ended and the children were tucked into bed, Catherine and William finally had the time alone they had both been anticipating and dreading. They walked hand in hand through the gardens behind their Norfolk home, following paths they had wandered countless times over the years. The evening air carried the scent of late-blooming roses and the distant sound of the sea, reminding them of all the peaceful moments they had shared in this sanctuary, away from public life. They spoke softly about practical matters first, schedules Catherine would need to manage alone, events William would miss, decisions that might arise in his absence. They discussed the children's upcoming activities, school commitments, and how to maintain family traditions even with him away. These mundane details felt important now, threads that would keep their family connected across the distance. As they sat on their favorite bench overlooking the meadow where they often played with the children, the conversation turned more personal. William took Catherine's hands in his, studying her face in the moonlight. He apologized for the worry he was causing her, for the burden of single parenting she would carry, for the media attention his departure would inevitably bring to their family. Catherine listened quietly, then gently reminded him of their wedding vows, for better or worse in times of joy and challenge. She told him how proud she was of his compassion, how much she admired his commitment to service, and how she would rather support him in following his conscience than watch him ignore the call to help others. Her words were strong, but her voice broke slightly as she spoke them. They talked about their early days together, remembering when their biggest concern was passing university exams and finding time for quiet dates away from curious photographers. They laughed about their awkward first attempts at royal events, how nervous they had both been, how they had relied on each other to navigate the strange world they had entered together. William confessed his fears about the mission, not just the physical dangers, but the emotional challenge of witnessing such suffering firsthand. He worried about maintaining his composure when faced with desperate families, about making a real difference rather than just providing a symbolic presence. Catherine reminded him of all the times she had watched him connect genuinely with people during royal visits, how naturally empathy came to him, how much stronger he was than he realized. They made promises to each other about staying connected despite poor communication infrastructure in the affected region. William would call whenever possible, even if just for a few minutes. Catherine would send daily messages, photos of the children, updates about their activities. They would maintain bedtime stories through video calls when the connection allowed, keeping that family tradition alive across continents. As the evening grew late, they reluctantly returned to the house, both knowing this was their last night together for weeks. They checked on the children one more time, adjusting blankets and whispering soft goodnight kisses. In their own bedroom, they packed the final items in William's luggage: photos of family moments, letters from the children, and a small book of poems Catherine had chosen for him to read during difficult moments. Catherine carefully folded his clothes, her hands lingering over fabrics that still carried his scent. She tucked little notes into his pockets, messages of love and encouragement he would find during his trip. William watched her tender care, feeling overwhelmed by gratitude for this woman who had transformed his life from duty-bound obligation into joyful purpose. They lay awake long into the night, talking quietly and holding each other close. Neither wanted to waste these precious hours sleeping, both trying to memorize the feeling of being together, safe and complete as a family unit. They spoke about plans for his return, special celebrations they would have, trips they wanted to take as a family when the mission was over. But underlying all their conversations was the unspoken awareness that tomorrow would test them in ways they had never experienced. Royal couples had faced separations before, but this felt different, more uncertain, more dangerous, more emotionally challenging than ceremonial duties or official visits. As dawn approached, Catherine finally drifted off in William's arms, exhausted by emotion and the effort of staying strong for everyone else. William remained awake, studying her peaceful face, silently promising to return safely to the family that meant everything to him. Outside their window, the first signs of daylight began to appear, marking the beginning of their goodbye. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle, as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the rose garden below. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her morning tea, the delicate china cup rattling against its saucer. Today was different from all the others. Today she would have to say goodbye to the man she had loved for over 2 decades, not knowing when she would see him again. Prince William had received the call 3 days earlier. A humanitarian crisis had erupted in a remote region of Africa, and as the future King of England, he felt compelled to lead a relief mission personally. The situation was dire: thousands of families displaced by unprecedented flooding, children separated from their parents, and communities struggling to survive without basic necessities. The royal family's involvement wasn't just ceremonial this time. William would be working directly with aid organizations, distributing supplies and helping coordinate rescue efforts. Catherine understood his sense of duty. She had fallen in love with that very quality when they were young students at St. Andrews University. She remembered how he would spend his weekends volunteering at local shelters, never seeking recognition, simply because it felt right. But understanding his calling didn't make this goodbye any easier. The mission would take him away for 6 weeks, to a region where communication would be limited and safety couldn't be guaranteed. Their 3 children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, sensed the tension in the household even though their parents tried to maintain normalcy. George, now old enough to understand the weight of royal responsibilities, had asked his father directly why he had to go. William had knelt down to his son's level, explaining that sometimes helping others meant making difficult sacrifices, and that being born into privilege meant using that privilege to serve those who had less. Charlotte, ever perceptive for her age, had quietly begun drawing pictures for her father to take with him. She worked on them in secret, carefully coloring each one with her favorite crayons. The drawings depicted their family together, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, their beloved dog Orla running through fields, and their cozy family dinners at Anmer Hall. She wanted him to remember home when he was far away. Little Louis, still too young to fully grasp what was happening, noticed only that his parents seemed sadder than usual. He began following his mother everywhere, clinging to her skirts and asking repeatedly when Daddy would be back from his big trip. Catherine's heart ached each time she had to tell him she didn't know exactly when. The palace staff moved quietly through their duties, aware that this departure was different from the usual royal engagements. They had seen many goodbyes over the years, but there was something profound about this one. Perhaps it was the uncertainty surrounding the mission, or maybe it was the way the princess seemed to cherish every ordinary moment, the way she lingered over breakfast conversations, how she held William's hand a little longer when they walked together, or how she would sometimes stop mid-conversation just to look at him, as if memorizing his face. William himself struggled with conflicting emotions. His sense of duty pulled him toward Africa, where he knew his presence could make a real difference. Aid organizations had specifically requested royal involvement to draw international attention to the crisis. But his heart anchored him to his family, to the woman who had stood by his side through every challenge, every triumph, and every moment of doubt about his role in the modern world. The couple had spent long nights talking about the mission, weighing the risks against the potential impact. Catherine never once asked him not to go, though he could see the worry in her eyes. Instead, she helped him prepare, researching the region, understanding the challenges he would face, and ensuring he had everything he needed. Her strength amazed him, just as it had during their early years when she faced intense media scrutiny with grace and dignity. Their love story had always been one of quiet strength and mutual support. They had weathered the storm of public breakups and makeups, the pressure of royal expectations, and the constant gaze of the world's media. Through it all, they had built something real and lasting, a partnership based on genuine affection, shared values, and an unshakable commitment to each other and their roles. As Catherine continued to watch from the window, she saw William walking across the grounds with their security detail, reviewing final safety protocols. Even from a distance, she could see the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He carried himself differently when he was in full royal mode, straighter, more formal, but also somehow more isolated. She knew that part of him was already preparing to step into his public role, to become the prince who belonged to the people rather than just to her. The irony wasn't lost on her that their most private, intimate goodbye would soon become a public moment. The media had already gathered outside the gates, waiting to capture images of his departure. Royal correspondents were preparing to broadcast their farewell to millions of viewers around the world. What should have been a personal family moment would be transformed into a symbol, analyzed and interpreted by people who had never experienced the simple pain of watching someone you love walk into uncertainty. But Catherine had learned to navigate this strange existence, where personal and public lives intertwined. She would smile for the cameras, wave gracefully, and maintain the composure expected of a future queen. Inside, though, she would be counting the days until his return, checking her phone for messages and keeping the family together while he was away. The preparations were nearly complete. William's luggage sat by the front door, packed with practical clothes and essential supplies rather than the formal wear usually associated with royal travel. His passport contained visas for 3 different countries, as the exact location of the mission might change based on evolving conditions. Medical supplies filled one suitcase, gifts for local children filled another, and a small bag contained the personal items that would remind him of home during long, difficult days ahead. Tonight would be their last evening together for weeks. They had planned a quiet family dinner, followed by time alone after the children went to bed. But even as they tried to make it special, both knew that tomorrow's goodbye would test the strength they had built together over the years.